I thought my 30th birthday dinner was going to be awkward, because my parents never liked my fiancé. I didn't know they had planned something worse. Stick with me while I tell you what really happened. The restaurant was quiet and expensive, the kind with soft lights and white tablecloths. My parents insisted on booking a private room. They said it was special. That should have warned me. When I walked in, I noticed too many relatives were there. Aunts I barely spoke to, cousins who never remembered my birthday. Everyone smiled too hard, like they were acting. My mother, Elaine, hugged me quickly. My father, Richard, barely looked up from his phone. My younger brother, Evan, joked with everyone like this was his celebration, not mine. I tried to relax, telling myself I was overthinking. Then I noticed a man I didn't recognize sitting 2 seats away from me. When I asked who he was, my mother said lightly, "Oh, just a family friend." He nodded politely but didn't speak. Dinner felt long. Every laugh sounded forced. My stomach stayed tight. When the cake finally came out, candles glowing, my mother stood up and tapped her glass. The room went silent. "We have a gift for you, sweetheart," she said with a bright smile. "Something you deserve to know." Before I could respond, my father slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a DNA test. He said, flat and cold, "You're not my real daughter." The room froze. My ears rang. My face burned. Someone gasped. My mother watched me closely, waiting for me to cry. Richard continued, saying I was the result of an affair and that he'd never felt responsible for me. Every word felt like a slap. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I just stared at the table, wishing the floor would open. Then a chair scraped softly. The stranger stood up. He looked straight at my parents and said calmly, "That's funny, because I already know exactly whose daughter she is." Every head turned. My mother's smile disappeared. My father went pale. The man glanced at me and said, "Madeline asked me to be here tonight." The room fell into total silence. For the first time in my life, my parents had no control, and I finally felt the balance shift. When I think back on my childhood, the signs were always there. I just didn't know how to name them back then. My brother Evan was the center of everything. His report cards went on the fridge. His birthdays were big and loud. When he spoke, my parents listened. When I spoke, I was told not to argue. If Evan forgot homework, he was stressed. If I forgot something, I was careless. My mother, Elaine, cared deeply about how our family looked to others. In public, she smiled and praised me. At home, her voice changed. She told me I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too hard to love. Anytime I cried, she said I was ungrateful for all she did. My father, Richard, wasn't cruel. He was worse, he was absent. He worked late, came home tired, and avoided conflict. When my mother criticized me, he stayed silent. When I needed protection, he looked away. His silence taught me that I wasn't worth defending. I grew up trying to earn approval that never came. I cleaned more, apologized more, tried harder. Nothing was ever enough. Somehow, everything that went wrong in the house became my fault. There were moments that confused me now. Once, I found medical papers tucked deep in a drawer. When I asked about them, my mother snapped and told me to stop snooping. Another time, during an argument, she muttered, "You're just like him," then refused to explain who she meant. At family gatherings, relatives would comment on how different I looked. Different eyes. Different smile. My mother would laugh too quickly and change the subject. I remember asking my father once why he never hugged me the way he hugged Evan. He said, "You're just more independent." I believed him. I learned not to ask again. All my life, I felt slightly outside my own family, like a guest who stayed too long. After that birthday dinner, every memory replayed differently. I started wondering if the love I chased my entire life was never missing at all. Maybe it was never meant for me. And for the first time, I asked myself a terrifying question. Was my whole childhood built on a lie? After the dinner ended, I didn't go home with anyone. I asked my parents to meet me the next morning. I needed answers, not excuses. We sat in their living room, the same place where I grew up trying to be good enough. The silence felt heavy. My hands were shaking, but my voice stayed calm. I asked my mother when they found out. Elaine didn't hesitate. "Years ago," she said. "You were in high school." The words hit harder than the DNA test itself. "You knew all that time?" I asked. She nodded. "We thought it was better to wait. You kept asking questions. You never let things go. We figured your 30th birthday was the right moment." The right moment. My father stared at the floor. When I asked him why he never defended me, his answer came quietly. I always suspected, Richard said. I just couldn't connect. I didn't know how to love you when I wasn't sure. I felt something inside me crack, not loudly, but completely. Elaine crossed her arms. We weren't trying to hurt you. You deserved honesty. Closure. Closure. They said the word like it was a gift. I reminded her she announced it in front of relatives, strangers, and people who barely knew me. She shrugged. It was going to come out eventually. That's when I understood the truth. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't emotional chaos. It was planned. They chose the day. They chose the audience. They chose humiliation. They wanted to put me in my place. I looked around the room, the walls, the photos, the furniture, and realized this house had never been my home. It was a place where I learned to survive, not belong. For years, I had chased their approval. I explained myself. I apologized for things I didn't do. I tried to be smaller, quieter, easier. And they still waited for the moment that would hurt the most. Something went numb inside me. Not anger. Not tears. Detachment. I stood up and told them I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't ask for love that had been withheld on purpose. Elaine looked surprised. Richard looked relieved. I walked out knowing one thing clearly for the first time in my life. If love had always come with conditions, then I was done trying to earn it. I met the man from the dinner 2 days later. We sat in a small coffee shop across town, far from my parents' neighborhood. He looked nervous, like he didn't know whether he was allowed to be there. When he saw me walk in, he stood up too fast and apologized for everything, things he hadn't even done. His name was Caleb Monroe. Months before my birthday, I had hired a private investigator. I didn't do it out of anger. I did it because something in my life never felt right. Too many half answers. Too many locked drawers. Too many moments where my mother shut conversations down. The investigator found the truth quietly. Paper trails. Old records. Hospital files that didn't match the stories I'd been told. That's when Caleb's name appeared. When I contacted him, he didn't believe it at first. Then he took a test of his own. The results came back undeniable. He was my biological father. Caleb told me he had never known my mother was pregnant. She disappeared from his life suddenly years ago. No calls. No letters. No explanation. He went on believing he'd simply been erased. When he found out about me, he didn't ask for anything. He didn't demand a place in my life. He only asked if I was okay. That alone felt unfamiliar. I told him about my birthday dinner. About my parents. About the way they treated me my whole life. He listened without interrupting, his hands shaking slightly on the table. He didn't show up to expose them. I invited him. I needed to know what they would choose when given silence. Caleb stayed quiet on purpose at the dinner. He watched my mother smile. He watched my father speak without hesitation. He waited to see if anyone would stop it. No one did. Only then did he stand. That moment wasn't chaos. It was clarity. My parents thought they were ambushing me. They believed they held the power. They didn't know the truth was already sitting at the table, waiting patiently. When Caleb finished speaking, he looked at me and said softly, "I'm sorry I wasn't there before. I would have been if I'd known." For the first time, I realized something painful and freeing. The humiliation they planned for me didn't break me. It exposed them. And for once, the trap wasn't mine. I went back to my parents' house one last time, not to argue, but to speak the truth. I brought a thin folder with me. Inside were copies from the private investigator, dates, hotel records, messages, and medical timelines that no longer matched my mother's story. Elaine sat stiff on the couch, already annoyed. Richard stood near the window, silent as always. I placed the folder on the table and slid it toward her. "Read it," I said. She barely glanced before shaking her head. "This is ridiculous. You're trying to rewrite the past." So I opened it myself. I read the dates out loud. The pregnancy timeline. The location records showing she wasn't where she claimed to be. I showed proof that the man she accused my father of being involved with wasn't even in the same state. Elaine's face tightened. Then I said the sentence that changed everything. "You didn't cheat on Dad," I said quietly. "You cheated with Caleb. And you blamed someone else to save yourself." The room went still. Richard turned around slowly. "What did you say?" Elaine stood up fast. "That's not true." But her voice cracked. I handed Richard the final page, the confirmation that the dates lined up only one way. There was no confusion left. He read it twice. Then again. His hands started to shake. "You let me believe she wasn't mine," he whispered. "You let me treat her differently." Elaine tried to explain. She said she was scared. She said she didn't want to lose her marriage. She said it was easier to let him doubt me than admit her mistake. Easier. Richard's face changed in a way I had never seen before. Not anger. Shame. All these years, he said, I punished her for something you did. For the first time, he looked at me, not with distance, not with suspicion, but with realization. Elaine began crying, then shouting. She accused me of ruining the family, of digging up things that should have stayed buried. But the control she always had was gone. No one defended her. Richard sat down heavily, staring at the floor. The marriage he believed in cracked in front of him. The story he built his parenting on collapsed. And I stood there calm. Because this time, the truth didn't hurt me. It finally explained everything. Elaine lost her power in that room. Not because I raised my voice, but because lies can't survive evidence. And the family that once made me feel small broke apart under its own truth. After everything fell apart, I didn't rush to fix anything. I didn't chase apologies or explanations. Instead, I spent time with Caleb. We started slowly. Coffee at first. Long walks where silence felt safe instead of heavy. He asked simple questions about my life. What I liked, what I wanted, what made me tired. No one had ever asked me those things without judgment. When I told him about my childhood, he didn't interrupt or defend himself. He didn't say he would have done better if he'd known. He just said, I'm sorry you carried that alone. No excuses. No justifications. Just accountability. I met his family weeks later. There was no pressure to belong. No expectation to perform. They were curious, kind, and awkward in an honest way. They didn't demand instant love. They offered space. For the first time, I felt seen without being evaluated. The contrast hurt more than I expected. Growing up, love had always felt conditional. I had to earn it by being quiet, helpful, agreeable. With Caleb's family, I didn't have to prove anything. I could simply exist. Meanwhile, Richard started calling. His messages were full of guilt and confusion. Elaine sent long texts asking for a fresh start. I didn't respond right away. When I finally did, my words were short and clear. I told them I needed distance. Not punishment. Not revenge. Distance. I wasn't ready for forgiveness, and I wasn't responsible for healing their guilt. I told them contact would happen only if it felt safe for me. Elaine accused me of being cruel. Richard said he just wanted to make things right. But I had learned something important. Making things right for them would mean making myself small again. So I didn't argue. I didn't explain further. I didn't soften my tone to make it easier for them to accept. That was new for me. Choosing myself felt unfamiliar, almost wrong at first. But it also felt peaceful. I stopped rehearsing conversations in my head. I stopped wondering how to be enough. Peace didn't come from answers. It came from boundaries. I wasn't closing the door out of anger. I was closing it because I finally understood something simple and powerful. Love that requires you to disappear is not love. And for the first time, I wasn't trying to earn a place in anyone's life. I was choosing where I truly belonged. After the birthday dinner, silence didn't last long. Relatives started calling. Aunts asked what really happened. Cousins whispered in group chats I was no longer part of. Everyone had seen the shock on my parents' faces that night, and people wanted explanations. Elaine moved fast. She told people I was confused. Emotional. That the night had been misunderstood. She said I was struggling and needed time. The same way she always dismissed me. This time, I didn't argue with her. When family members reached out to me directly, I answered simply. I told them the truth. I didn't cry on the phone. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't add drama. I explained that the DNA test was real, that it had been hidden for years, and that my birthday was chosen on purpose. Some people were quiet afterward. Others apologized for things they never questioned before. Elaine didn't expect that. She showed up at a family gathering weeks later, smiling too wide, trying to regain control. When someone asked her why the truth came out the way it did, she tried to speak for me. I gently stopped her. I can explain, I said. The room went quiet. I told them what I knew. About the investigator. About the lie. About how I grew up believing something was wrong with me when it never was. No anger. Just facts. Richard stood up slowly. He looked older than I remembered. I failed her, he said. I let my doubts turn into distance. I didn't protect my daughter. He didn't look at Elaine when he said it. That moment changed everything. Elaine tried to interrupt, but no one listened. The sympathy she once controlled began slipping away. People started asking her questions she couldn't deflect. She wasn't exposed in a dramatic scene. She was revealed quietly. Invitations stopped coming. Conversations shifted when she entered rooms. The image she worked so hard to protect began cracking on its own. I didn't celebrate. I felt calm. For once, I wasn't defending myself. I wasn't chasing understanding. The truth stood on its own. I learned something important during that time. You don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need revenge when honesty is enough. Watching the truth settle where lies once lived was more powerful than any argument I could have made. I walked away from those conversations lighter, not because people took my side, but because I finally told my story without fear. And that was enough. I met my brother, Evan, a few days later. Not at our parents' house, but at a small park near where we grew up. I wanted the truth, not excuses wrapped in comfort. He looked nervous when he sat down. He didn't joke this time. He didn't smile. I asked him one question. How long did you know? He stared at the ground for a long moment before answering. Since college, he said quietly. The words knocked the air out of me. You knew for years? I asked. He nodded. Mom told me. She said it wasn't my place to say anything. I waited for him to explain why he never warned me. Why he watched me struggle. Why he let me walk into that dinner blind. He shrugged. Things were easier this way. That hurt more than yelling ever could. He admitted that as long as I stayed unsure, he stayed secure. The attention, the support, the protection, all of it stayed with him. Telling me the truth would have changed the balance. So you chose yourself, I said. He didn't deny it. That was the moment something inside me finally broke. Not loudly, not angrily, but completely. My parents betrayed me out of fear and control. My brother betrayed me out of convenience. I realized he had watched me question my worth for years and said nothing. He listened when our mother criticized me. He accepted the benefits of silence. He wasn't confused. He was comfortable. I stood up and told him I wasn't angry anymore. I was finished. He asked if that meant we could work on things later. I said no. Some relationships don't end with a fight. They end with understanding. I told him loyalty isn't about blood. It's about choice. And he had chosen himself every time it mattered. He tried to apologize then. Said he didn't think it would go this far. But it already had. I walked away without looking back. I didn't block him out of spite. I simply stopped reaching. That conversation marked the end of my old family. Not because I wanted to punish anyone, but because I finally saw them clearly. The hardest loss wasn't losing my parents. It was losing the brother I thought would protect me. And with that realization, the last piece of my childhood quietly fell away. Life became quieter after everything settled. Not empty, just calm. I started spending more time with Caleb and his family. There were no big speeches or emotional pressure. We shared meals, small conversations, ordinary moments. No one asked me to explain myself. No one expected gratitude for being kind. That felt new. When they invited me places, it wasn't to test loyalty. When they checked on me, it wasn't to control my choices. They listened without correcting my feelings. They remembered things I mentioned once. They cared without keeping score. I began to notice the difference. Love didn't feel heavy anymore. With my parents, affection always came with rules. Say the right thing. Act the right way. Don't embarrass the family. With Caleb's relatives, I didn't feel watched. I felt welcome. There was no dramatic moment where I suddenly called them my real family. It happened slowly, naturally, through consistency and respect. I learned that family isn't created by blood alone. It's created by safety. Richard tried reaching out again. His messages were careful and apologetic. Elaine sent shorter ones, pretending everything could return to normal if I just let go. I didn't respond right away. When I finally did, I was clear. I told them I was open to limited contact, but only with honesty, no guilt, and no rewriting the past. I wouldn't accept blame for boundaries that protected me. Elaine didn't like that. Richard said he understood, even if it hurt. For once, their feelings didn't decide my actions. I no longer rushed to reply. I no longer explained myself in long paragraphs. Silence was no longer something I feared. Walking away didn't make me cold. It made me strong. I stopped chasing closure from people who never gave me care. I stopped hoping they would become who I needed them to be. Acceptance didn't mean forgiveness. It meant clarity. Some people can love you only when you stay small. Others love you simply because you exist. I chose the second kind. My life didn't suddenly become perfect. There were still quiet nights and heavy thoughts. But there was no chaos. No manipulation. No constant self-doubt. For the first time, my relationships felt peaceful. And I realized something important. Leaving wasn't running away. It was choosing a life where love didn't hurt. I agreed to meet my parents one last time. Not to reopen wounds, but to close the door properly. We sat at a small cafe. Neutral ground. No memories attached. Elaine arrived first, already emotional. Richard followed quietly, looking tired. Elaine reached for my hand. I pulled mine back gently. She started talking right away. She said families make mistakes. That forgiveness is what keeps people together. That holding on to the past only causes pain. She waited for me to say it was okay. I didn't. Instead, I spoke calmly. I told her I wasn't angry anymore. Anger had already passed. What remained was understanding. I see you clearly now, I said. And that changed everything. She looked confused. I explained that the worst part wasn't the DNA test or the public humiliation. It was knowing they chose silence and cruelty again and again. That they watched me doubt myself and did nothing. I turned to my father. I needed you to protect me, I said. You chose comfort instead. Richard's eyes filled, but I didn't stop. I told them I wasn't there to forgive or accuse. I was there to thank them. Elaine frowned. For what? For showing me who you really are, I said. The truth stunned her. If you hadn't done what you did, I continued, I would still be trying to earn love that was never freely given. They had no response. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't loud. I didn't list every hurt. I didn't need to. I stood up and wished them peace. Not reconciliation. Not promises. Just peace. Elaine began to cry. Richard whispered my name. I didn't turn back. As I walked away, I felt no rush of victory. No dramatic relief. Just lightness. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need answers. I didn't need them to understand. The revenge wasn't public shame or harsh words. It was freedom. For the first time, I felt whole, not because I discovered where my DNA came from, but because I finally chose myself. I stepped outside into the quiet afternoon, breathing easily. My story didn't end with forgiveness. It ended with clarity. And that was enough. If this story moved you, remember this. Truth and boundaries protect your mental health more than silence ever will. You don't owe access to people who hurt you. If you believe in healing through awareness and real-life lessons, support our channel by liking, sharing, and subscribing for more meaningful stories.